Have you ever been talked about in a sermon without your permission? I want you to think, if that applies to you, how you felt in that moment. In this video, I'm going to explain why talking about somebody in a sermon or something similar without their permission is actually a form of spiritual abuse. My name is Dr. Felicia. I'm a licensed psychologist, and in this channel, I talk a lot about identifying spiritual abuse, preventing it, and recovering from it. So, on to the question that I asked you at the beginning. Have you ever been in a situation where you were in a church or similar environment and you were talked about from the pulpit? Your life was used as fodder for a sermon without your permission. People that I have talked to who have been through spiritual abuse have cited this as one of the events that kind of helped them realize that they were being spiritually abused. Now, for some people, you might understand why this is spiritual abuse, and for some people, you might not. I'm going to explain why. When I talk about spiritual abuse, I always make sure that I identify that there is harm and there is control that is used by the abuser under the guise of spirituality. Okay. And spiritual abuse tends to be very sneaky and it tends to be underhanded, right? That's why a lot of people have been in spiritually abusive situations for years and they don't realize it. And so in this case, I'm not saying that that if a pastor talks about somebody in their sermon without naming them, that it is always spiritual abuse. But what they should do is that they should get that person's permission. Anytime you are in an environment, a spiritual environment, and you are in this position, and there's this pastor who is using your life as part of their sermon without asking you, that's actually abusing their spiritual power and spiritual authority. And the best thing to do in that case is, to ask that person, hey, do you mind if I share the story? Now, some people will push back and say, well, that person wasn't named, so why is that such a big deal? But the person who was not named is, hearing that. And imagine how upsetting and violating it must feel that when something that you shared that you weren't expecting to be shared with other people is shared with other people, right? That must not feel good. And so I'm going to explain how this can look. Sometimes when people share random details about something in a sermon that pertains to someone's life, maybe it's not that bad, but what I've seen in a lot of spiritually abusive situations is that a particular person is being used as kind of like a bad example, right? They're being shamed for something in front of everybody. So you can imagine, maybe a pastor tells a story about somebody and they're like, oh, this person, reacted this way and they did this. And then you hear everybody giving their opinion on it and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person would act this way, or why would they do something so stupid, right? And so you are getting, this really like awful feedback about something that you didn't have any permission to be shared, right? You didn't give your permission to be shared. And so that can just be a really awful and violating experience. And the reason why this is abusive is not only is it an abuse of power, sometimes people have done this sort of thing to other people as a way of like shaming them, right? And so it's one thing to tell somebody to their face, hey, like, I don't agree with what you did, or I see things a different way. But then when this person is getting on a stage to do this, it is not, it's sort of using it's basically a way of public shaming, and it is not an ideal way of handling a dispute with somebody. And so plenty of spiritually abusive situations, whether you listen to podcasts or read blogs or hear stories from other people will often say that this happened to them. And so they were, something was said about them that was very negative, and it was used kind of like an object lesson, or here's the moral of the story. And the difficult thing about it is that when this happens to you, it's going to be really difficult to address it, right? Because you can say, hey, like you were talking about me and I didn't appreciate it. And the person could say, oh, I wasn't talking about you, I was talking about somebody else, right? And so there's that aspect of public shaming and bringing harm to somebody by doing that, especially since the permission, they didn't get their permission to do so. Um, Another reason why this can be abusive behavior is because it is a way of showing control and manipulation. Believe it or not, when there's a power differential like that, when there's a leader and then there's somebody who's under the leader, there has to be a degree of trust involved, right? And so that person who is sharing information with the leader is trusting them to handle that information in a way that will not harm them. And so when that information is being used as like an object lesson or whatnot, or a way to get a point across, it's done at that person's expense. It's done at the expense of the person who has less power. And so individuals have often, talked about how when this happened to them, they felt really, not only did they feel violated, they felt scared. And they felt scared because they're thinking, what else can this person do to me, right? They have information about my life, they have details about my life, and then they're sharing this in front of a group of people without my permission. And so it is very much a power play. And people have reported that, they've been on the receiving ends of these like, missives and sermons and things like that after doing something that they felt offended the leader in retrospect, right? So maybe the leader or the pastor wanted them to do something, right? Maybe they said, I want you to, cancel your vacation because we need extra help here at the office. And the person didn't do so, right? And so now they are sort of being targeted in this sermon, and the sermon might, just paint the person in a very bad light, right? And so it is a way of showing that person who is targeted that, hey, the leader has control and they're going to do what they want. Basically, don't cross this person. And so it is a subtle way of threatening somebody. Another reason why using somebody's life or details in a sermon, especially to shame them like without permission, is it's a way for that leader to get ahead of the story and control the narrative, right? And so let's say that there is a dispute between this pastor, this leader, and somebody else. By putting their story out there in the form of a sermon, they can spin it whichever way they want to, right? I'm sure that you've heard this saying, there's this person's side, there's this person's side, and then there's a truth. There are quote unquote three sides to every story, right? And the point of what I'm saying is, the reason I bring that up is because when people do things like this, when they use somebody's life or use details about somebody in a sermon, basically talk about them from behind the pulpit, what they're doing is they're trying to put their side of the story out there first and make it look a particular way, right? They're probably going to leave out a lot of details. They're going to spin the narrative in a certain way that makes that other person look bad and make them look good, right? And so if I give you the case of the vacation thing, maybe the pastor asked this person to, cancel their vacation and help them with this thing, and they said no. The pastor might spin it that, oh, we really needed all this help and this person was so selfish and they abandoned us in our time of need and they decided to go on vacation when we had asked for their help, right? So it's going to look like that person who didn't give up their vacation was this, selfish, entitled person. These are just examples, but the reason I'm telling you this is I want you to understand that it's much more than just sharing details. It's how those details are used and the intent of the person in sharing that information, as well as that power differential, right? And usually, the person up there who's giving the sermons or giving the speeches or whatever is usually a person with more power than the other people. So that's important to take into account. And so I'd love to hear from you all in the comment section. Have you ever been in that situation? Have you ever been talked about, talked about from behind the pulpit, use your life or details of your life used in a sermon to, shame you or anything like that? And how did you respond to that? Did you end up confronting the person about it, or did you not do so? And I'd really like to hear from you because it's a theme that I'm seeing, in not only comment sections in my videos, but also from other people who have been through spiritual abuse. They say that this happens to them, and it's a very upsetting experience. And so I don't want you to just dismiss it as, oh, well, that's just church hurt or that people hurting other people. That to me, especially when it's done in the ways that I talked about, is a form of spiritual abuse. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you would like to book a free consultation with me, go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, click on the orange button, and you can book your free consultation that way. All right. I hope you have a wonderful day that is filled with peace. Bye bye.